Well, hey, good morning, everybody. Good to see you guys. If you are new here with us, my name is John Wagler, and I'm part of this team here. And so thankful that you are here on Hill City's 5th birthday, which is like all of our birthday, which is nice, right? You get another birthday and cake, and some of you guys you got cake on the way in, and I appreciate that because like you're gonna get it on the way out too, because I know how you are. And listen, I've already had 2 pieces, so it's all good. Just really excited for today. It's a nostalgic day for sure. Driving in here this morning, thinking about how in March of 2013, this was an idea and it was a dream, and that God put on our hearts. And right around that time, we started gathering 20 of us or so, roughly 20 of us, that began to just pray and about a community that we could build and or be a part of, and culture, and what we wanted it to feel like and be like, and what kind of impact we wanted throughout Richmond. And to see what God has done over the last 5 years has been pretty cool. This Sunday, so our first Sunday was technically September 7th, but I consider our real Sunday September 14th of 2014, because the first week there were people there just to support us and everything, but week 2 was like we knew who we had and who were like really interested to be a part of this community. And we had 155 people, including kids, that day. And just to see, today we'll have, somewhere between probably 1,400 to 1,500 people coming today. And it's been really cool to see what God's been doing. And it's not about how great of a community Hill City is, though I think we are a great one, but it's not about that. It's really about how great God is and what God is doing in this movement that we are a part of. And so it's pretty cool just to celebrate that. We've got some stuff at the end that we're going to do as well. But this series was kind of birthed out of a couple of different things that have been going on in my heart and my life. And first was this idea around movement. I've been super interested in movements, whether that's in the business world or in people's lives or in kind of Jesus movements. And what we kind of see throughout movements is there's some commonalities. Like there's a desire to live for something bigger, having a bigger vision for something. There's a desire to change. There's a willingness to do all the small things to make something happen. There's also this kind of interesting tension that builds with competition and collaboration. And what I mean by that is in the midst of movements and wanting to move in a certain direction, there's this, you want to compete against what was there, but you can't just compete. You also got to collaborate and do that within the context of community. And so in every movement, those are common themes that are there. And then when you think of like God movements, and it's been a while since there's been like a big God movement in America, probably since the 1960s with the Jesus movement. But the consistent kind of 3 elements that are part of a big God movement are people of prayer, and not just kind of prayer, like really people that like pray, and love to pray. And you got courageous believers in Jesus who are willing to essentially sell out for the gospel and for the message of Jesus and kind of go all in with that. And then culture in and of itself has to be in an awful place, meaning they get to the edge and they look over and they think, man, do we want to make this leap, or do we want to turn back and see if there's something else available for us? And when they turn back to see, the question is will there be Christians being like, all right, we're ready? And so I think that part of what this movement that's going to happen, and I believe there's going to be another movement in America. I believe there's going to be another movement in Richmond. There's already like little signs of it. I don't think we're bad enough yet culturally. I know that seems odd, but like we're just not there yet, but we'll probably get there. And but I think in that moment, will there be people prepared? Will there be people ready? Will there be faithful followers of Jesus to stand up and love people unbelievably well in the midst of all of that stuff? And so that's part of how this series came about, because when you think about movement, we do want to get places, but we don't often want to do the work to get there. And so we're going to talk about what does it mean to be healthy and have movement emotionally and spiritually and relationally and physically, and the things that can connect us. And this is not about a self-help series. This is really way deeper than that. It's going to have an incredible impact in your life. And the second way that this whole thing came about of Take the Stairs was actually with a conversation with my daughter, Nevaeh. We were talking about our annoyances in the world. And one of the things, you guys have heard me talk about my annoyances. Like, I don't understand why people can't put clothes back when they're at a store. Like, how can you not just fold it and put it back, or put it back on the hanger and walk to where you got it from, right? Like, it's not that hard of a concept. And or like when you go to a grocery store, if you take the peanut butter, you don't want the peanut butter anymore. You know what? Put it back where the peanut butter goes, not in the frozen section, right? They're like simple things of life that we can all do. Or like if you get a grocery cart, like, take it back to where it belongs. Listen, it's 2019, and I still don't understand why we have not had a countrywide movement of understanding why it's important to learn how to zipper merge, right? And like, I just don't get it. Like, it's an annoying thing to me. And so there are things like that that just annoy me like crazy. And so we were talking about that, and she said, Dad, what's your favorite quote? And I said, it's excuses are for losers, but she knows that. And then I said, what's yours? And then she said, I just read this one that I really liked, and she said it's this, that there's no elevator to success. You have to take the stairs. And so we started talking about that, and I love that quote, and she goes, Dad, you should do a sermon on that. And I'm like, here we are. So that's going to be the line for the entire series. Like, you'll see that every single week. But here's why it's important for us to kind of bring that in. Too often we want movement, but we don't want to do the things that will get us there. Too often we want movement, but we don't want to embrace the struggle that might mean to get us there. We do this with God. We do this with our own health. We do this with our emotions. We do this with our relationships. We do this stuff all the time. And we even do this with God, don't we? We want God to move in a big way in our life, but we want him to just like do it. We don't want to take the time and do the work to make something happen. And so often God's like, I do want to do something big in your life. I do want to see you transform. I do want to help that, like heal that part of your soul. I do, but will you please partner with me in this? And so we want to talk about those things in this series. And so one of the first things we're going to talk about is actually something that I know no one here would ever deal with, but it's a thing that other people do, and it's complaining. And how many of you guys have complained recently? Yeah, so this is going to be fun. So complaining is something, I will say this, just to set the tone. A complaining spirit is sinful. Okay? So complaining is like an interesting thing because it's something that we accept. It's something that we've normalized. It's something that we justify all the time in our language. It's something that we gather together and do, right? And so complaining, though, will actually move you away from the things of God. Like, here's what you don't find. You don't find people that complain a lot that have healthy relationships. You don't find people that complain a lot that are like successful in life. You don't find people that complain a lot that are really in tune with following Jesus. You don't find it. And so what that tells us is that when we complain a lot, that moves us away from the things of God. And so that means if it's something that moving us away from the things of God, that makes it sinful. And so a complaining spirit then is sinful. And so when I started thinking about this, the Bible talks a lot about grumbling. That's the word that they use for complaining. And so I wrote this down this week. I just said, like, people who consistently grumble will be the same people who consistently stumble emotionally, spiritually, relationally, and physically. And so it's the same thing. Like you kind of make the same thing like over and over and over again, and you complain, but you continue to stumble on the same thing. And the reason is because you won't take the steps. You want the escalator or the elevator. You want the quick button. Like even when our kids, like if there's an escalator and there's stairs right next to it with our kids, we always say, we're walking the stairs. Why? Because we need to appreciate the fact we can walk the stairs. And we can make our way up there. Lacey's mom, who has MS, and she's in a wheelchair a lot of the time in her life, she, at one point, just made the comment when someone was complaining about how tired their legs were and stuff like that, and she said, I wish I could use my legs all the time. And so when we want movement, and we desire great movement, we have to understand that we have to be grateful for what we have, we have to be willing to do the work, and we have to be willing to take those steps. and not look for the easy way out. But this complaining thing works in us. This complaining thing starts happening. And so I wrote a few things down to kind of set us up, and then I'll give us the antidote to complaining here at the end. But here's what happens with complainers. Complainers will lack self-awareness, they'll lack discipline, they'll lack maturity, they lack healthy relationships. See, complainers don't understand that they're a complainer a lot of times because it just feels normal. And so they might do something like this. They might really embrace their negativity or their cynicism, and they might just say, like, this is just how I am. And they embrace that as part. They might say something like this: I'm just being real about stuff. I'm like, no, you're not. You're being such a downer, right? You're complaining about stuff. So you might see that in people that way. Second thing is complainers won't build people up because they enjoy tearing them down too much. So complainers in their words, like if they're complaining a lot, you'll notice that they also aren't encouraging in their words, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. Complainers try to be contagious because doing it alone makes them realize how unhealthy they are. Like, think about it. If you sat by yourself and just kept complaining, you would start saying to yourself, this doesn't feel right. This is so unhealthy for me to think this way and talk this way and everything. So what do? You try and get people with you to do it because then it feels good. Let's all complain together. Yes. And and one goes off the other, right? And it becomes contagious. They want it that way because it makes them feel good. And then the last one is this, that complainers lack wisdom. Here's what happens when you complain. In your brain, you have something called the hippocampus, which houses your ability to have critical thought and the moments to be able how your brain tells you to make wise decisions. So in your brain, when you complain, your neurons are not firing in that part of your brain. It actually shrinks. And so complaining, so this is good to know, complaining makes you dumber. So just like when you're complaining, you can even say that to yourself, like, I'm actually making myself dumber right now, right? So this kind of understanding what is actually happening to our brains even in that moment. Now, when you think about complaining, there are three major types of complaining, because some of you guys are thinking like, oh my gosh, I can't ever say anything, and I'll let you off the hook in a second. But here's the three types of complaining. You have chronic complainers, all right? Chronic complainers are the people that are negative, are cynical all the time, they blame people. Like they've gone job to job to job, and it's always the company's fault. It's always the manager's fault, right? I can't find a good man or a good woman because all of them are terrible. Maybe it's not them, right? Like it's like always like this, right? Like, so you're blaming somebody all the time and complaining about something all the time. Those are the chronic complainers. They go church to church to church, and it's always the church's fault, right? Chronic complainers. They kill culture. Like that's what they want to do. They want to kill culture and things that are healthy around them. You got another form of complaining is venting. All right. So some of you are like, okay, phew. Like it's okay to vent, right? Like we can vent. There is a positive way to vent. Like just because sometimes you got to get stuff off your chest and you got to discuss it with people and you got to seek out wisdom on something. So complaining can reveal itself in a moment of venting that can be okay. All right. So you got to do those things sometimes, but it can turn quickly to something that's sinful and unhealthy. It can move you to being chronic very quickly. I'll give you a personal example. Lacey and I were going through something in our lives for a couple of years, actually. It was some stuff that was repeating, and it was nothing that actually we were doing. It was kind of be putting on us through some different things, and we started complaining about it. And in the beginning, we were venting. We were just like, we got to talk to somebody about this. We got to hear some people's perspective, and we kind of got to get through it. But here's what happened. We vented a few too many times, and it turned into complaining. And then we found ourselves, that's all we were talking about. In like every dinner and every meal, and every time we were like, oh my gosh, this is all we talk about. And we had to have this moment of saying like, this needs to stop. This is like hurting our soul. Like when was the last time we started talking about something positive? Like let's push this stuff aside. This is hurting us. And so it turned into unhealthy. It turned into kind of a sinful kind of chronic complaining. And so you got to be careful with the venting piece. And the third way of complaining is problem solving. Now, this is the most healthy way to do something. So in our language, it starts sounding differently. So we might see something that's wrong, but as we're kind of talking about it, we're looking for a solution, okay? And so those are the three kind of types of complaining. Now, I want to give you 5 questions to ask yourself, and then we're going to get to the antidote to all this. So 5 questions to ask yourself when it comes to complaining. The first one is this. Does my complaint have a positive tone and language? So as you're complaining about something or bringing something up, or as you're venting, just ask yourself, is my tone positive here? Is my language positive? Or am I looking to put body blows on somebody else, right? So kind of think about it that way. The second thing is, does my complaint consist of a desire to solve a problem? It's solution-based. The third thing is will this possible solution make everyone involved healthier? So if you're complaining about something and your solution is one that benefits you but crushes somebody else, right? Like that's not healthy. Number 4, have I considered the impact of my words on others and the organization? So that's not something we commonly think about, but like even in our complaints, again, solution-based or not. You're complaining, if you want to complain about a company for some reason, I was reading a study that was done that over 95% of complaints that people have about companies, they never actually engage the company about the complaint to try and come up with the problem. So it's just like an interesting kind of dynamic to what we do. And so just thinking about it that way. And the fifth thing is this, how can this make me better or learn something new? So in the midst of something that might make you want to complain, we should start taking a step back and say, okay, how can this make me better? Or how can this allow me to learn something? As a staff, I tell our staff that the first thing that we say whenever we hear a complaint, and we see like it's something that needs to be fixed or something that we see it's a big hole and something that maybe we have here, is we don't complain about the people that are complaining. We ask ourselves, have we led people properly? So it puts it on us to figure the problem out. And so, and then the second thing that we want to start asking ourselves, all right, even in the midst of complaint, and even if that person's a chronic complainer and they're not healthy, whatever, is there something true in what they're saying? So that we can learn from it and grow from it. So if you manage people, that's something to consider in the midst of whatever complaints you receive. So we have all these complaints. So then you got to start thinking about, okay, who are the people around me? Like, how do they handle complaining? And what about this? Like for instance, are you around people that talk about their friends or complain about their friends all the time? Are you around couples that complain about each other all the time? Are you around parents that complain about their kids? Right? It's sinful in that. Why? Because it's setting us up to move away from the things of Jesus. Or how about even something simple like this? I'm talking about like ungrateful hearts. Are you the kind of person that's like, oh, Monday? It seems benign, right? It seems like nothing, but what is that setting you up for? To complain. And so just think about those things because they take us in a certain direction. It's a mindset that's incredibly important. And so I want to talk about like now the antidote to this because Paul, this guy Paul, if you're not familiar with your Bible, Paul was one of the early leaders in the Christian church. He wrote a bunch of letters to churches, and he wrote a good chunk of the New Testament of the Bible. And in particular, he wrote this letter to the church at Philippi, who had been going through a lot of different things and a lot of persecution, and they started to grumble. They started to complain a little bit. And so Paul writes this letter to get them to understand, to think differently, and to approach this differently. And so in Philippians chapter 2, it says this, starting in verse 3. It says, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. I want to pause there for a second. That's hard. But that is the antidote to complaining. That is the thing that will take you away from having a complaining spirit. That is the thing that sets you in the right direction. And Paul says that every person that says they follow Jesus should have the same attitude as Jesus. I mean, process that for a second. So when you complained that last time, if you paused for a second and said, is this the same attitude as Jesus? And if the answer is no, then what? We should want to change that. If you're here and you don't believe in Jesus and you've got friends who do and they just brought you here today, here's something you can use on them, right? If they start complaining, you could just say, that doesn't sound like Jesus to me, right? Like, so you can use this to your benefit. But we should have the same attitude that Jesus had. That becomes this incredible antidote to complaining. He continues on in verse 14. We'll skip down to there. He He says, do everything without complaining and arguing so that no one can criticize you. Live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people. Hold firmly to the word of life. Then on the day of Christ's return, I will be proud that I did not run the race in vain and that my work was not useless. But I will rejoice even when I lose my life, pouring it out like a liquid offering to God, just like your faithful service is an offering to God. And I want all of you to share that joy. Yes, you should rejoice, and I will share your joy. So here are three questions to ask yourself around complaining that will help us move in the right direction. The first thing is this: does your attitude resemble Jesus? Does your attitude resemble Jesus? Now again, this is incredibly difficult, but unbelievably important, because this is the mindset that we set. So much of the answer to our problems is honestly attitude. I mean, think about it. Think about how often, if we just had the right mindset and attitude about things, it would shift everything. Sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes it might be an extreme thing, but so many times the answers to our problems are simply based around attitude and how to handle it. And so Paul's saying, does it resemble Jesus? Do you have a sense of humility about you just like Jesus did? Do you think of others as better than yourselves? Now listen, here's what people do with that verse, and you miss the meaning of it. Paul is not saying that you thinking less of yourself allows you to think of others better. Because sometimes people take this verse and be like, oh, woe is me. I'm worthless. I'm nothing. But I mean, you're better than me, so I'll serve you, right? Like, that's not what Paul is saying here. Paul is saying, no. You see yourself of having great worth. You see yourself as a child of God. You see yourself as made in the image of God. And that sets you up incredibly well to see, like, that's how God sees me. So that gives me great worth. And then because of that, we treat other people, because of that great love for us, then what comes out of us is this love for others. And so we take interest in others. And that's why we talk about this phrasing here at Hill City. We talk about being irrationally generous. Why do we want to be irrationally generous? Well, because God was irrationally generous to us through Jesus. We didn't deserve that, but he died on a cross for our sin and forgives us of our sins and gives us an opportunity to experience hope and purpose in this life now and to build his kingdom here now. Like, it gives us, like, that's unbelievably generous. And so because of that, then our response as people who say we follow Jesus is that we are too irrationally generous. And so that is, like, we talk about this here. Like, we want everyone to be a part of this and everyone to give and everyone to kind of do it, to give on a regular basis. And whether that's online or you drop in the share boxes or whatever you do. And like, we don't talk about percentages or anything. We just like, hey, choose something that you could do regularly to be a part of this community. And then when this stuff happens and we kind of all gather together, watch what God does. And here's what we've started to see. We've given way over $500,000 in these first few years. We've been able to increase that dramatically every single year. This year will be way above than what we were last year in giving money away. We are constantly looking for different people to engage and see how we can bless and be generous towards. We can see, like, even like last year in the share offering that we do every November, we ask you guys to give 1 day's wage. And something simple like that, giving 1 day's wage, allowed us to give away, I think it was almost $150,000 last year. In one offering. We're like, we're going to give all the money away. And we found our partnerships and everything that we did that. And so how did that happen? People were just like, you know what, I'm in. I want to be generous with this. And so when we talk about giving together and all that stuff, it's not about to make anything for us better or to kind of prop us up or anything else. We're like, no, we want to do this together so, man, we can just do way more outside of here. I said this in the all-in night that we had a couple months ago. I said, I want to be a church that gives away millions of dollars a year. Like, we have the capacity in our community right now. We have easily, and I'm saying this like easily, we have the capacity to give for our budget to probably be around $4 to $4.5 million a year. All right, we do not have that coming in, but it could be. We have the capacity to do that pretty easily. And here's the thing, and this is what I tell people, if we had $4.5 million to come in, we'll probably have about $1.5 million come in this year. If we had $4.5 million come in, guess what we would do with the difference of that $3 million? We have a couple of things we'd like to do, but we'd probably give away about $2.9 million of that. So just process that for a second, right? So this is what I mean by irrationally generous. That's kind of how we move towards the things of Jesus. And he goes in there, and I love what he says in verse 14 and 15. He says, hey, stop complaining. Don't, stop your complaining so that you won't be criticized. And here's what else he's saying. That when you complain, we open ourselves up for criticism. Here's why. Because we can say, if we're followers of Jesus, and we can say this. We can say, we want to love people like crazy. We want to be incredibly generous. We want to do this. We want to do that. We want to be forgiving. We want to be gracious. We want to be kind. We want to be all those things. But man, when we start complaining and we become a cancer in someone's culture, when we stop being generous, when we start doing all these things, what happens in those moments? We open ourselves up for criticism. Why? Because you're a hypocrite. You're untrustworthy with what you say. And so he's like, stop doing all the complaining. You're opening yourselves up to be criticized. And he continues on, and this is the second question. Does your attitude bring light to others? Does your attitude bring light to others? He continues on in verse 15. He says, hey, you children of God, you should be shining like bright lights. So in the midst of darkness and everything, that this idea of light, and that we should bring life to the people around us. And so let me put it to you this way. When was the last time someone said something like this? Maybe not these exact words, but something around this kind of concept. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad I work with you. I'm so glad you're my friend. I'm so glad I had a chance to talk to you because, man, you bring so much light in the midst of this, or you bring so much positivity. You bring so much encouragement. You bring so much wisdom into this. If we aren't hearing this, if we call ourselves followers of Jesus, if we aren't hearing this, that's a problem. Because we should be lights in the midst of darkness that's around. There'd be something significant that's coming out of us as we have this attitude to bring light into darkness. He talks about words, and kind of the words that we're speaking become such a big part of this. And so even when we talk about words, do our words actually bring comfort and clarity to people, or are they confusing and bring more conflict? When we engage people with our words, what does that look like? Our words become so powerful. And Ephesians 4 was another letter that he wrote. In Ephesians 4:29, he said this. He said, don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. Now, let me say this. The foul or abusive part is this idea of being rotten or corrupt. And sometimes what we do is we use this. You might hear people use this verse to say, hey, don't cuss. All right? That's not what this verse is talking about. Because inherently, so if you take just words in general, words are neutral. Words don't have meaning until we put meaning into them and make them mean something. And so a word, so it's the heart behind the use of words. So for instance, you ready? You might say shoot, or you might say dang it, or you might say, I don't know, son of a, you might say something like that, and you don't finish it, but you use that phrase, right? Someone could cuss at the same time, right, for the same purpose and have the same heart behind it. Now, when you say shoot, you aren't sitting there being like, oh, that's so sinful. I can't believe I cussed again, right? Darn it, right? And so you don't do it. So those same moments where you might express something, it's not about the actual word, because guess what? In that moment of shoot versus another S word that someone else might use that might have the same heart, guess what's way more corrupt and way worse? Someone who's gossiping. That's corrupt. That's rotten. That's abusive. And so it doesn't matter. You could cut somebody, with your words, you could cut somebody up and be really kind of nice about it. You don't cuss, you don't even yell, but man, you just kind of pop, 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 and you walk away and be like, yep, right, I just got them, and you kind of cut them down. Listen, that is far worse and more corrupt and more abusive than someone who just, maybe they dropped an F-bomb because they were mad at something. All right, so it's the important, now I'm not saying, now don't walk out of here and be like, well, I said I could cuss, and I'm free at last, right? Like, so I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying, pay attention to what really matters behind it and what really matters behind your words. Because he talks about this idea of being blameless and pure, and that should come out in our words as well. And whether or not it's building people up. And here's the third thing. Does your attitude display joy? So our attitudes are the antidote to this whole idea of complaining. And so it says that, man, our attitude should display joy. And here's what it means to display joy. That no matter what you're going through, because listen, just because you follow Jesus doesn't mean you're not going to go through some junk, or it's not going to get hard, or there's not going to be suffering, okay? So even in those moments, is there something that's like an inner joy inside of you, a gratefulness, an awareness, something to build off of? So does it display joy? In your highest of highs, is the joy that's coming out of you, does it point back to the things of Jesus? Right? This inner joy that is actually there. He also talks about in verse 17 and 18, he talks about this idea of being a liquid offering, which is just language that in the old sacrificial system that they used to have, when they would make a sacrifice to God, the way that they would top it off would be this kind of sweet wine. And we put the sweet wine on the sacrifice to God. What would then come out was kind of this aroma. And this would be like an offering to God that would. And so he says, hey, your sacrifice, your life should be this sweet offering, this drink offering, this liquid offering to God. There should be this sweet aroma to God. And man, that should give us so much joy. I think, honestly, some of the worst people to be around are the Christians who have no joy. Are the Christians who come in on a Sunday and bitter that they're here. Are the Christians who make following Jesus seem like it's like an angry, worry-filled, negative thing to do, lifestyle to have. See, there should be a joy inside of anyone who follows Jesus. That's just different because you have a larger hope, a larger purpose, a larger reason to kind of do all this stuff, and a different perspective to begin to see life through. That's about this whole idea. So in the midst of what we might complain, it makes us take a step back and say, whoa, hold on a second. What's going on here? Where are my words taking me? Where's my heart, my attitude behind all this? If you're new here, we do this thing to kind of wrap things up. We do 2 minutes to think. And it's a time we just wanted to have a time of reflection, what God might be speaking into your heart. And we just ask folks to write down answers to the questions, whether that you can do that by hand or if you want to do it on your phone. And so here are the 3 questions we have for this morning. What area do you find yourself complaining the most? Is it chronic, is it venting, or is it problem solving? Number 2, what do you have in place to help curb complaining? And then number 3, who are a couple of people you can ask to hold you accountable? So we're going to put 2 minutes up there, and I'll come back and close us in prayer. You guys pray with me. So God, this morning, I pray we won't be complainers, that we will really take into account and do some kind of inventory of our mindset and our attitude. Do we have the kind of grit that you want us to have? Do we have the kind of positivity that you want us to have? Do we have the kind of verbiage to build people up and encourage folks? Do we have the light inside of us because of you that projects out into those that are around us? And so God, I pray that we will always be sensitive to any time we complain, to understand, am I trying to be a problem solver here? Am I venting? Or is this a chronic thing that I'm doing? But God, most importantly, those are all good things, but God, most importantly, I want to pray for our hearts. That inside of our hearts, is there a joy because we follow you? Inside of our hearts, is there a joy because we see our purpose and our hope in you? Maybe for some folks here, that's not the case, and they have an opportunity to choose whether or not to follow you and to discover what that means. And so, God, we never want to let an opportunity go by to just allow folks to make that kind of decision. So, God, we thank you that you are hope. We thank you that you give us such great purpose, that you are a light in the midst of the darkness, and that we can stand firm and stand proudly to know that as we follow you, that our attitude has such a big difference. Our attitude gives us great perspective. Our attitude allows us to follow you like you desire us to. And through that, not only do we see our life differently, but man, we will love others so well. So God, we thank you for who you are and what you're doing inside of us and our community. We lead this to you in your name, we pray. Everybody said, amen. Amen. Before